Senator LaTourette, thanks for joining us this week.
Sure.
So the House is out this week, so we don't have a ton of policy stuff to talk about. But let's start off with a little bit here. That is, I feel like it's Groundhog's Day again. We've talked about all these different, cliffs that we've gotten to, the fiscal cliff, all these different cliffs. We talked a lot last year about the transportation bill, about the highway trust fund running out of money. Right. We got this extension that was supposed to give Congress an opportunity, this new Congress, to get a long-term deal done. And here it is, we're just a couple of weeks away from yet another expiration of the highway trust fund, and we don't have a deal.
Right.
What's going on?
Well, again, because a deal would require some really difficult decisions on where the money's going to come from. The Congress has been unable to reach an agreement on that, and quite frankly, as the administration as well. People seem to be pinning their hopes on something known as repatriation, which would allow American corporations to bring back money that they've made overseas at a favorable tax rate. And in exchange for that favorable tax rate, they would then have to make an investment in infrastructure. That is a solution. It's a short-term solution. It really doesn't fix the problem long-term. But again, in this town of just get me to the next crisis, that seems to be the one that has some currency, but they're not there yet. And so as a result, the deadline, which was set for the end of May, will pass without a long-term resolution. There'll be a short-term extension, I would predict. It'll take us into the fall. And then in about September, they'll come up with their best shot if they're able to. We may be in a situation where we wind up again with an 8, 9, 10-month extension come September, but the current plan is to try and cobble something together so that over the summertime you can have at least something in place. And it appears that this repatriation business is something that's going to be in place.
Well, what I think is so interesting is now that we're facing this deadline, and essentially, even though they have until the end of the month, with Memorial Day recess,
right,
they really only got 2 weeks to get something done,
right,
which is an incredibly short amount of time in Washington.
Right.
We can't even really decide on how long the extension should be.
That's right.
Some folks like the Chamber and Inhofe are pushing for a middle of the summer, July deadline. Orrin Hatch said yesterday, absolutely not. Congress needs till the end of the year to get something done. Seems like to me, if we actually get an extension that went through the end of the year, aren't we full on into the 2016 presidential election? How do we get anything done at that point?
You really don't. I mean, all of the oxygen gets sucked out of Washington pretty soon by the presidential election, and even though the matter is pretty much resolved on the Democratic side with Secretary Clinton, it's very much not resolved on the Republican side. And as a result, all the messaging is going to be centered around who the next president's going to be, and this will be subsumed by that. And so I think you can get into the Labor Day area, but once you get past Labor Day, it's going to be very difficult to get anything done that doesn't have some type of fingerprint of the presidential race on it.
Well, the presidential race is a good segue to what the last thing I want to talk about, which was the political piece from this week, with 3 presidential candidates announced their intentions to run this week, 2 of whom, quite frankly, have absolutely no chance of winning the Republican nomination. The third, it's probably a very slim chance of winning the Republican nomination. Former HP executive Carly Fiorina announced this week. Maryland neurosurgeon Ben Carson announced this week, and former governor of Arkansas Mike Huckabee, who ran in 2008 unsuccessfully, also announced this week. Let's take each one of them kind of one at a time here. I'll start with kind of the least likely to win the nomination, and that being Ben Carson.
Yeah.
Is there anything fundamentally that separates this type of run from what we saw from somebody like Herman Cain 4 years ago?
Not so much. I mean, he does have the distinction of being the only African American running for the Republican nomination, which has a set of benefits to him. He's a very, very bright guy, and if you go and look at his background, you're a very impressive fellow, to be sure. He does resonate with some of the very conservatives. I could see where you have sort of the phenomenon that occurred 4 years ago with Herman Cain and others, where each week somebody else rises to the top of that heap about who's the favorite of the Tea Party that particular week. But in terms of long-term staying power and the finances and everything else necessary to get it done, probably not a very good shot.
The next one I wanted to mention is Carly Fiorina. Carly Fiorina is the former Chief Executive Officer of Hewlett-Packard.
Yeah.
She also ran unsuccessfully for Senate in California in 2010. She seems to be running a very interesting campaign here in that essentially her job, apparently, she sees herself as kind of the chief critic of Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
Is she running for president, or is she running for a cabinet position?
Oh, I think she's running for president. I mean, she is investing a lot of money, her own money, into this endeavor. I liked very much her rollout video. I thought it was a nice video. But she, like Dr. Carson, really doesn't have much of a shot, despite the fact that she'll be the only woman seeking the Republican nomination. And you'd think that that would give her a leg up, but she's polling in the 1% areas. And as a matter of fact, there's an article today about CNN and Fox are trying to figure out, I mean, I've lost track, but it seems you get about 16 people running for president on the Republican side. And when they have these debates, who's going to be permitted to be in the debates? What's sort of the benchmark, the minimum level of support you need to get in order to get into the debates, because otherwise they're just going to be a mess. And she probably doesn't make it at this moment in time.
Well, and the last one I want to talk about here is former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Huckabee, served as a long-term governor in Arkansas. He ran unsuccessfully for the Republican nomination in 2008, though he exceeded a lot of people's expectations, including having won the Iowa caucuses, which really kind of, jump-started his campaign. He's been, a Fox News celebrity over the last couple of years. But it seems like somebody who, with his kind of resume, particularly having won the Iowa caucuses before, that his entrance would have made more of a impact on the race,
right.
And it doesn't seem to have. Has his time really kind of passed?
I think it has, not necessarily because of a deficiency on his part, but his space, if you will, within the Republican Party. You now have the Cruzes and the Rubios and the Pauls, and he has to share that space, where before he had a lot of that space to himself and was able to connect with the evangelical crowd, given his past history and his ability to sort of light up an audience or a congregation, if you will. And I think that his challenge is going to be how to punch out of that bag now with all these other candidates in there, and I just don't see how he gets it done. And by waiting, he has permitted these other candidates like Senator Cruz to sort of stake out territory that could and might have been his if he'd made a decision earlier.
One final candidate I'd be remiss in not mentioning isn't officially a candidate yet, so he's not one of the three who announced, but he came really close to announcing he's running, and that's Ohio Governor John Kasich.
Yep.
Kasich, kind of like the others, is polling very low, but he brings an entirely different set of things to this race, and potentially could be a strong candidate, particularly given kind of the crowding on the right. What do you think about the potential of a run here?
Well, listen, Governor Kasich has a lot of great qualities and would make a very, I think, attractive candidate to a lot of people. His difficulty at this moment in time is he's got to get off the dime, because every week as you get 3 more, 2 more, whatever the case may be, the space is really crowded out, and people's ability to sort of differentiate between all these people is getting shorter and shorter. But as the executive of a state who won re-election really overwhelmingly in a swing state like Ohio, he could punch through this thing, but he really has to make up his mind soon. And I don't see him moving in that direction quickly enough, but hopefully he will. He'll listen to people, and if he's going to run, he's going to run. And I think he can, and in fact, line up in that lane that was reserved for governors, and that would, I think, impact Huckabee, who we just talked about. It would impact Chris Christie, who's waning. It would impact Scott Walker, and so forth and so on. But he really needs to get a move on and broaden his message beyond just balancing the budget, which is an important message. But I think people need to hear a little bit more from him, and when they do, they'll be impressed.
Well, I for one thought his line on Fox News Sunday about how he was just an ordinary guy with a big job, I thought was a pretty good way to kind of tap into some of the populist underline. Final exit question for you.
Sure.
does all of this kind of crowding actually end up helping Jeb Bush at the end of the day? Jeb Bush hasn't announced. We all assume he's running. He's put together all the pieces. He's raising a ton of money.
Right.
And at times it seems like Jeb and the 12 dwarfs. Like at the end of the day, does this kind of everybody in and their mother end up helping a Jeb Bush?
I think so, and unless somebody really catches fire. But Jeb Bush is doing exactly what his brother did 14 years ago, 15 years ago. And he's quietly raising a lot of money and getting IOUs and chits and putting key people in place around the country to be supportive. And so I think it does benefit him, again, unless somebody just lights the thing up and separates themselves from the pack by exciting the imagination of a huge amount of the Republican electorate. I think this does benefit Jeb Bush.
Well, it's still not late for you to announce.
Yeah, apparently.
It's going to be fun to watch over the next couple of months. Congressman, thanks.
Thank you.